the Lions did sign 36-year-old edge rusher Bruce Irvin yesterday, who's been in the league for like a decade. And Dan Campbell did tell the morning show yesterday that Brad is always looking for ways to improve the football team.
Yep.
And so is this a flyer? I mean, I guess we can get it. My first question, I guess, is why Bruce Irvin? I mean, they didn't go after JPP. They didn't go after Randy Gregory. Frank Clark was available at one point. But this guy they decided to go after. What is different about him? Or is it possibly just where they are in the season?
I think what's different is that he's the guy who's available now after playing against the Chargers and they couldn't get to the quarterback. I think that, all these other players, there were more certainly than what you just mentioned. You have to get up to the trade deadline and the guys were available. Still the free agents were available. The trade deadline guys, the Washington guys get traded and the Lions didn't do anything on the defensive side. So now you're just looking at free agent guys, who's available. And there were a handful of named defensive ends that you could look at that point after the deadline. Pierre Paul was one of them. Bruce Irvin. The guy who used to play with the Chargers. I can't remember his name now. Defensive end there. There were very few. And I think this is just kind of taking a chance. This is kicking the tires, signing him to the practice squad. It's not going to hurt you. It's a guy who played last year in 11 games. He did have 3.5 sacks last year with Seattle. You're not asking him to play every down. This is a guy you're bringing in as a specialist. Your job, get to the quarterback. Can you do it? Let's see what you got.
I wondered a little bit, I went back and started research, Bruce Irvin the last couple of years. And one thing that stood out, and I kind of remember this from a year ago, he was in Seattle. He didn't have a huge impact on the field. I think he finished, started 10 games and finished with 3.5 sacks and 5 TFLs. But they fell behind Tampa early, 14-0. And he called the defense over and read them the riot act in the middle of the huddle. And I'm like, okay, is this a guy that exudes that kind of veteran leadership that would appeal to Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell? They're very specific about their type of guys. And does Bruce Irvin check the box of being one of their type of guys? This, to me, is a possibility, maybe even a strong possibility, based upon their behavior in the past, is that, okay, what we saw in that tirade he threw and chewing out the defense that gave him one touchdown the rest of the day after that, is that indicative of a player that is a Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes kind of leader dude? I'm connecting a couple of dots here. They might not be related at all, but that would make some sense because there's been players available and they just haven't. And now they pulled the trigger on a player that was available to everybody else. And by the way, everybody else chose somebody else.
Yeah, I just pulled up a list of NFL free agents that are still available. And the guy I was trying to think of was Melvin Ingram, the defensive end. He's still out there. I think Carlos Dunlap, is he still out there? Robert Quinn, wasn't he just signed? But there's a bunch of them. You get all the way down this list, though. Number 75 of available free agents on the list is Bruce Irvin. Mm-hmm. 2 slots behind Jason Pierre-Paul. After him, further on down the list, Taco Charlton. Now, I saw he was actually had a post on social media the other day about working out, how he's ready to go, in great shape and all that. Players are still trying to do it. Kenny Willekes from Michigan State was another one who was rated ahead of Charlton, who was on there. The Lions worked him out a few weeks ago.
Willekes?
Yeah. He was there, but they didn't sign him. So they've always been kind of kicking the tires and bringing guys in. But now we hear that they've actually signed a guy. Why do they do it? I think, to a large part of what you said. Maybe he's got that leadership ability and holding guys accountable and keeping them, hey, this is what we got to do. You guys want to win? Here's what we do.
I feel like knowing the people involved, that would make sense. But, again, it's just curious that this player was the guy they selected.
I disagree. I don't think it has anything to do with it. I think the culture's set. The leaders are set in this team. Charles Harris has been disappointing on the field, but off the field, he's a captain for a reason. Penei Sewell's a captain. I think they have their leaders and accountability guys. I think the reason why, in my opinion, they've signed Bruce Irvin right now is I think James Houston is not as far as long as they thought. And so right now they made a move. And it's just seriously just kicking the tires on the guy. He's on the practice squad, whether he sees any action or not, no big deal, right?
Yep.
And I think the reason is, and Brad Holmes is always doing this, people. It's not like all of a sudden he said, you know what, hey, today I'm going to look for a defensive end. No, he's always looking for talent throughout the season, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. The reason they made the signing now, I really think it is because the James Houston's progress is not where they thought it'd be. Let's get some depth just in case.
Well, and then can he make an impact? Does this guy make an impact? If you look at the tail end of his career here, he was pretty damn good earlier in his career, and these are his sack totals his first 7 years: 8, 2, 6.5, 5.5, 7, 8, 6.5. That 6.5 came in a season split between Atlanta and Oakland. Then he signed with Carolina in 2019, back up to 8.5.
Yep.
And then since then, not much. He spent 2020 with Seattle for a couple of games, no sacks. Signed in Chicago last year, played 6 games, no sacks, no TFLs. That's 2 years ago, sorry. No sacks, no TFLs. Then he goes back to Seattle where his career started, minimal impact, 10 games started, 11 total, 3.5 sacks, 5 TFLs.
See, it's not really when you look at that, it's not really minimal impact. 3.5 sacks and 5 tackles for loss, 9 quarterback hits. That's kind of productive for a guy who only started 10 games with the team.
Don't we have that guy that doesn't get sacks but gets quarterback hits, it gets pressures?
But this is he's got 3.5 sacks. That was 3.5 sacks in 10 starts last year. This year, they don't have that guy. Because those guys combined have a sack and a half when you look at Romeo Okwara and Charles Harris.
Well, it was funny because earlier in the year, the Lions were near the top of the NFL in QB pressures, okay? They were pressuring the quarterback. They just weren't getting home. I can't imagine they're looking for another guy that doesn't sack the quarterback. But I hope he does.
But he did.
I hope he does. Well, okay, so they play.
So he's got what he did last year is equivalent basically to slightly less than what I guess Aleem McNeil has done, because McNeil's got 4.5 sacks, so an extra sack. But it's not. I'm not looking at the pressures because I don't have that number in front of me. It's the hits. You're getting a pressure if you're hitting the quarterback, but he's hitting the quarterback. That's even better than the pressure, and he did it 9 times last year.
In 10 games.
Yeah.
So he's going to get one. I mean, at that production rate, 1 QB hit a game the rest of the way. I mean, I'll take it, but I don't know that it sizably changes the season.
I don't know.
Forward.
Look, as far as your first question about what kind of an impact does it have, I'm not sure if he's going to have much of an impact. I'm not sure if he's going to see the field. I don't know if he's going to suit up on Sunday. I'm not going to be surprised if he's inactive, because he hasn't been playing. He hasn't played at all this year.
Yeah, there's a better chance that he's inactive than he actually impacts the game Sunday against the Bears. But